Anybody here familiar, first of all, with the Mutual UFO network?
Yep.
Okay, a handful of people, that's great. So MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, is the world's largest civilian UFO research organization. The organization's been around since 1969. I've only been around since 1971, but I joined the organization in my early 20s in 1993. So I've been part of the organization now for over 30 years. I've been the state director of the Michigan chapter for over 20 years now. And when I do a presentation like this, many people ask what qualifies me to speak on the topic. And so besides being in MUFON and my role within MUFON, I have written 2 books on the UFO subject. Have been participated in the publication of 6 other books on the UFO subject, and have done either appearances for or been a consultant for UFO programming on all of these networks. Okay, really good stuff. So another thing I like to do is sort of set the groundwork here for people who think, wow, you know, it could be the fact that maybe, just maybe, Earth is the only planet where there's life in the universe. So by one estimate, and there you can find several estimates, there's about 300 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. 300 billion stars. And with the procession of space telescopes that we've launched, Hubble, Kepler, Webb, they estimate that about 1 in 6 stars, from what they can see, has a potentially habitable planet or moon. And that means out of 300 billion stars, 50 billion worlds just in the Milky Way galaxy may be able to support life. But wait, there's more. The Hubble telescope could see 100 billion other galaxies. This picture up on the screen, this isn't a picture of stars, these are galaxies, whole galaxies full of hundreds of billions of stars. And if you just assume, this is all theoretical of course, but if you just assume that the Milky Way is average with about 50 billion habitable worlds, and you multiply that by the 100 billion visible galaxies, that's 5 sextillion potentially life-sustaining worlds in the visible universe. And you know what I'm going to say next? But wait, there's more. While Hubble could only see 100 billion other galaxies, it's estimated that there are actually 2 trillion other galaxies out there. 2 trillion galaxies filled with hundreds of billions of stars. And if you amp up that estimate, about 50 billion worlds in any given galaxy, if our galaxy is average, then it comes out to, yes, 100 sextillion potentially habitable worlds in our universe. And then you have to say, you know, Earth is pretty special. We do a lot of things, you know, it took a lot of things for life to kick up here, but what are the odds that life only popped up here with this many potential worlds for it to do so? So, there's this thing about the whole UFO subject. It's called Fermi's paradox. Said, okay, there's hundreds of billions of planets out there, or more, or much more. But if that is the case, how come we aren't seeing signs of visitation here? Gotcha. But really, you know, after so many, nearly 60 years in investigating UFOs, MUFON has dredged up so many things that I think are not even marginal, but are very, very compelling, that something is happening. And it used to be, when I would do a bit on the news, they would have me at the end of the news program, and whenever they would have me on, there would be one of 3 songs that they would play. It was always one of 3 songs. It was either Star Trek, The X-Files, or, what was the other one? It wasn't In Search Of. Yes, actually, yeah, Twilight Zone. So, but just last week, I was on Fox 2 live in their studio and their 10 o'clock news, just 15 minutes into the hour, no theme music. So things have come a long way. And so besides the media, there's a lot of serious conversation going on at high levels. There is a group, it's called Arrow. They used to be called something else before they were called something else before they were called something else. But they've been around now since 2007, some say 2012, it depends on how you define them being organized. But the basic is the Pentagon is paying millions of dollars to look into the UFO phenomenon. And every year, they should be putting out a report, and they have been putting out a report every year, except for 2025. Strangely, they did not put out a report. Now, in government, you might have seen one of the open congressional hearings on the UFO topic. A couple people that are big into the UFO phenomenon, Kristen Gillibrand, New York Senator, Tim Burchett, Tennessee Congressman, they're in the media quite a bit. Marco Rubio used to be in the media quite a bit, but now that he's got a new job, he's not doing that anymore. Though it is interesting that the president had said almost casually, oh yeah, let's release some UFO files. People are into that. So still waiting to hear what happens next with that. And NASA's even in on it. A couple years ago, they had a 4-hour press conference where everybody on this stage spoke and talked about all the different fun things that NASA has that can help identify unidentified things in the sky. And they had another press conference a few months later saying, we're still looking, haven't found anything yet. But you have the military, you have the government, you have science, all into the phenomena. You have the media taking the giggle factor out of it now suddenly. So UFOs are a serious matter now. And like I said, Mufon's been into it since '69. This gentleman here is our current international director, Dave McDonald. We have a monthly publication. We have a big conference every year. It's in Covington, Kentucky this year at the end of August, where we have a bunch of UFO presenters at it. And we used to have our own TV series, Hangar 1, that was on the air on the History Channel for a few seasons. And probably our most famous member is Dan Aykroyd. He's pumped a lot of money into MUFON and done a lot of TV stuff for us. And what we do in a group like MUFON, of course, we investigate UFO reports. There are several places you can go and say, hey, I saw something, and they'll file it away. We actually do investigations. Now, this is a semi-updated number of reports that we've gotten since 2010. Now, we've had paper reports coming into us up until about the year 2000. We had a previous computer database for the next 10 years. And then in 2010, we have our latest computer database, which is in fact about to be replaced again. But that's why I'm picking 2010, because in 2010, it became very easy for us to collect reports. And so that number sort of developed into something that became predictable. Michigan is getting about roughly 200 sightings alone reported to us every year, just in Michigan. And United States, 110,000, worldwide, 145,000. The reason that this is not much bigger than this is many other countries have their own homegrown UFO groups. And this is not to say that everything that comes into us is unidentified. In fact, we can usually identify at least 90% of what comes into us every year. People misidentify aircraft, different celestial objects. Yes, I did have a very good friend report Venus a couple of years ago, God bless him. And drones, you understand, are a big thing. Different people will send a picture in saying, I didn't see this glare in my photo when I took it, but look, I see something unidentified here. We get a lot of those. And it turns out to be just lens reflections, things like that. And Chinese lanterns or sky lanterns, those sometimes come up. All sorts of different things can be identified. But it's that last 10% that's unidentified that is, the good stuff. and what keeps us going. So that means about every year we get about 20 good unidentified sightings in our all-volunteer investigation force. So what I'm going to talk about today, this is really a historical overview of the very biggest cases that Michigan has seen, and it starts in 1953, goes to 1966, 1975, 1994, and then I'm going to mention an event that happened in Linden, Michigan. Maybe you heard of the place. In fact, on a road named Linden. So, starting in 1953, this is known as the Kinross incident, if you're somebody that looks into further details about anything that in this field that you hear about. So the Korean War had ended in the summer of 1953, and Kinross Air Force Base was stationed up there. Its main concern was to make sure that nothing happened with the shipping lanes that would affect the war, that no terrorist activity would go after the Sulaks, things like that. So on November 23rd, 1953, the base was very surprised the war was over, and yet something very strange was seen directly over the Sulaks on their radar. A circular looking, highly reflective unknown. And so they scrambled an F-89 Scorpion jet with 2 pilots aboard to go check it out. And as the jet took off, the unknown flew out over Lake Superior at a speed of about 500 miles an hour. And then it paused. And the plane eventually caught up with it, got closer and closer. And as it got closer, they lost radio contact with the pilots. And then they watched on the radar as the plane and the unknown object seemed to intersect, and then both disappeared forever. They have no idea what happened to the plane. They never found the wreckage, nothing, just gone. And the family of Felix Moncla was the pilot, Robert Wilson was on board with him. And the family of Moncla, who lived down in Louisiana, put up a memorial to him saying that he disappeared intercepting a UFO. So the family was certain that somehow this involved a flying saucer. And maybe you heard about Project Blue Book, the Air Force's largest investigation into the UFO phenomena. They were active from 1952 to 1969, investigated over 12,000 cases. So Blue Book starts in 52. This event is in 53. It involves the Air Force. So of course, naturally, Project Blue Book is going to look into it. So Blue Book goes to the base and asks, oh, okay, so what did the object look like? And they said, well, it was very reflective, and it was on the radar for so long, and then it flew off. They're like, no, what did it look like? And they're like, well, the only people that we know probably got a good look at it actually was the pilots, and they're gone. So Project Blue Book said, well, if that's that case, then we can't rule out that just something went wrong with your radar. And so that's what we're going to chalk this up to, is a faulty radar. And they said, well, what about the missing pilot? And they said, well, what's that got to do with your faulty radar? So it's amusing, and it's not at all amusing because it's tragic, but the accident report for the Air Force states that the 2 went down probably due to pilot vertigo. It does not mention the faulty radar. And the radar doesn't mention the plane going down into Lake Superior. So the 2 are separated in documentation for the Air Force, and they don't actually intersect. Now this case was just left open, hanging, mysterious for many years, and then a strange thing happened. In August of 2006, a man calling himself Adam Jimenez, saying he was from the Great Lakes Dive Company, had found not only the plane, but a flying saucer at the bottom of Lake Superior. And that if people wanted to know more about their find, they could buy the DVD that they were about to sell. And they were like, right? So what they didn't take into account is that there was a very active group like Mufon. There are a lot of other independent investigators into strange things. And so it actually only took a couple days to discover there is no man named Adam Jimenez, there is no Great Lakes Dive Company, and the whole thing just disappeared again. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to the pilots or the jet. We do today have technology that's being onboarded that can do much better scanning of lake beds and shallow ocean beds. And it's assumed that at some point they're going to scan Lake Superior with this technology, and we'll see if anything comes up. But until then, it remains a mystery. Okay, now going down to southeast Michigan. Where did I put my... Anybody remember the 1966 UFO wave? Yeah. So let's call it swamp gas, because if you don't know how swamp gas ties into this, you will in a moment. So UFOs were seen all over the country, late 65 to early 67, was considered a sort of a longer, dragged out UFO wave of sightings. Michigan had a tremendous number of them, and if I was to just point to 1 week of activity, I think it tells the whole story. March 14th through the 21st, 1966. Ann Arbor, the campus of the University of Michigan, from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m., there were over 100 witnesses to people watching discs and lights of various colors doing dramatic maneuvers over the campus. And that's a lot of witnesses for essentially the middle of the night. And one of the interesting things was that amongst the witnesses was Hillsdale Civil Defense Director Bud Van Horn, who becomes important in a few days in this sighting wave. And there were also several police officers. Now, law enforcement are considered to be expert witnesses because what they see at the scene of an accident or the scene of a crime holds heavy weight in the courtroom. They are trained to observe details keenly. And so it was very interesting that one of the officers who witnessed something, Washtenaw County Deputy Sheriff Buford Bushrow, said this to the media. "This is the strangest thing that we've ever witnessed. We would not have believed this story if we hadn't seen it with our own eyes. These objects can move at fantastic speeds, make very sharp turns, dive and climb, and hover with great maneuverability. We have no idea what these objects were or where they could have come from. At 4:20 a.m., there were 4 of these objects flying in a line formation in a northwesterly direction. At 5:30, these objects went out of view and were not seen again." So what he could have said was nothing. What he could have said was, people are seeing lights in the sky, we're investigating it. But instead, he comes out with all of this to the press. So he was very deeply impressed with what he saw. Now, every day that week, people were seeing things and reporting things. But the next really big night, one of the big famous nights from that whole time period was March 20th, 1966. Here we have Frank Manor speaking with J. Allen Hynek, and on the porch here, I believe that's Ronald, his son. Now the thing about Hynek was he wasn't there on the 20th. Hynek came a couple days later. He was the Air Force's scientific advisor. He was their chief investigator to look into UFO phenomena. He was an astronomer. He was a college professor out of Illinois, educated, dedicated to the military project that he was part of, and so he came to investigate. So anyway, Frank and Ronald are here pointing, sort of saying, look, he was like over there, wherever he's saying. So that night, there were 5 UFOs seen, different colored lights, again, brightly colored lights, this time flying in a pattern formation over Dexter, Michigan. One of the objects of this group of 5 descended straight down. Now, when it came down, it was very bright, and it came down very close to the Manor household. There were 9 people inside. The dogs started going nuts inside the house, and their house was bathed in this very bright light. And then the family rushed to the windows to see this strange object, disc object, move out into the trees in the swampy and forested area at the outskirts of their home. So Frank and Ronald decided that they were going to be the posse to go out and see what they could find. Frank's wife, she calls the police. And the officers, 2 of the officers that showed up were Washtenaw County Sheriff's Deputy Stanley McFadden and David Fitzpatrick, would ultimately take the Manners case as a police report. I know it's too small to read up there, but that's what this is. And also Sheriff Robert Taylor, who not only saw the thing come down, but heard the phone call shared with him on the police scanner dispatch communication. So he comes as well to see if he can find the object. So Frank and Ronald Manor, to recap, are out in the woods looking for this thing now. McFadden and Fitzpatrick, these other officers who came to investigate, now are also out in the woods. The 2 of them, separate from Frank and Ronald, out looking. Sheriff Robert Taylor is at a 3rd location who's come out into the woods to look to see if he could find where this thing came down. And all along the street, in front of the Manor household, all these people who have police scanners heard there was a UFO, and the street was lined, clogged with people wanting to see something strange. So it would actually be Frank and Ronald that would stumble across it, if you will. Some of the reports say that they were like 100 yards away or whatever, but Ronald swears that they were only about 300 feet from the object. And this is how it was described. It had a rough exterior with red lights around the side. It had a dome on top. I know it's very Jetsons, but that was what was reported. And here is a reproduction of the object, just something simple done in PowerPoint. This is part of the area at the outskirts of the Manor home. So I kind of popped the 2 together. And here's an image of Frank and Ronald out looking, standing where they were, looking at the object, reenacting what they had seen. And according to Ronald, the object, when they got that close and they didn't know what to do, they didn't think they were safe if they got any closer, they decided to just hold back. And then Ronald suddenly says to his father, look at that horrible thing. And then suddenly, boom, the object shot off. And it shot over McFadden and Fitzpatrick's police car. And according to the story, ended up flying down Island Lake Road with 3 police cars spotting it and giving chase and not catching it. So, little pro tip, if you ever have a UFO land in your backyard, just give them a simple insult. They have very thin skins apparently, and they're out of there. Okay, not to be outdone, March 21st, also a very big night. Now, I will say this about Frank at this point, I guess. The Manor family, they were just inundated with media and people showing up at their homes, asking them about the UFO, and they didn't want any part of it whatsoever. It was unfortunate the amount of attention they received. They eventually moved out, but they were very unhappy that all these people came up to their home asking about the UFO. So on March 21st, Hillsdale College, this is a week from the U of M visit, so maybe the aliens doing a college tour, right? So this event was actually covered on CBS with Walter Cronkite, and he did a piece on this, and you can still actually find it on YouTube. But at the women's dorm at Hillsdale College, at about 10:30, many of the young students there were sitting along the window when they saw a silver disc pass their dorm. And it had colored lights all the way around it. And they watched as it flew past very slowly, and then they couldn't see it anymore. So then, one of the students, Gidget Cohn, Gidget is what she went by. There was also a Pinky there, you know, all the fun nicknames folks had back then. But, so Gidget says, hey, I read that our civil defense director saw something like this a week ago. I'm gonna call him. So she calls his house, gets his wife. Wife says he's in the shower. She tells what happens to Van Horn's wife, says this UFO flew past the window, this flying saucer. And Van Horn's wife says, okay, thanks for letting us know. If you should ever see anything like this in the future, you feel free to call us back. Half an hour later, they call back saying, remember that UFO that flew past our window half hour ago? And this time they're talking to Bud, and he says, yeah, I got the message. Well, it's kind of landed in the ball field. And he's like, what? And so he's like, I'll be right there. He calls the police, then goes to the dorm. He is greeted now by 87 students, plus their den mother, Dean Kelly Hearn, and now there are 89 people in there, witness to this UFO. Currently, the Arboretum is so grown up you can't see through the trees, but back then in the 60s you could. And the object was just slowly bobbing up and down, bobbing up and down. And anytime a police car would pass by, the object would turn off its lights, the police car would drive by, and the object would turn its lights on again. Very strange. So, did the object not know it was being witnessed by nearly 100 people? Did the object just care about the police? Was the object differentiating between the police and other people? Why do UFOs even have lights? All these questions, right? So they said it had a red light on one side, white light on the other, and then, yeah, it had the dome. And after it bobbed up and down several times, it then shot off at a tremendous speed. And Van Horn says, well, lucky for us, this is a college campus. Let's do this. Tomorrow morning, we'll go out and we'll dig up soil samples in the area where we think it came down. They didn't see any depression in the ground, but they had a good idea where it was. And then we'll also take some control samples and we'll bring it to the school lab and see what we can find. And depending on whose version of the results that you hear, the students either found off the charts radiation, or it was all a bungle because the students really didn't know what they were doing. But in any case, what you can't take away from this is 89 witnesses. So in comes Project Blue Book, in comes Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Now he was told coming into Michigan not to give any impression at all that what people were seeing was anything anomalous. And we know this because after Hynek ultimately left Project Blue Book when it wound down, he formed his own group known as the Center for UFO Studies. And that is based out of Chicago, and it still operates today. Hynek passed in '86, but his group is still going. So Hynek comes in, knowing his marching orders, he's like, all right, I gotta calm people down, I gotta lower the temperature. And he has a press conference after investigating for a couple days, and this is at the Detroit Press Club. You can also still find this video and on YouTube. And Hynek says during the press conference, he goes, why would an alien civilization come from across the galaxy to land in a swamp in Dexter? Ha ha ha. Maybe that is what actually people were seeing, was maybe swamp gas. They landed in a swamp, maybe people were seeing marsh gas or swamp gas. And the media seized on it, Air Force says UFO is nothing but marsh gas. Military says UFOs are swamp gas and the whole 9 yards. And people got really upset. You know, I know what I saw. It was not swamp gas. And what do people do when they're upset is write their congressman. And Gerald Ford was a congressman at the time here in Michigan, and he was receiving calls, letters, visits from his constituents, upset about the explanation given from the Air Force. And so to appease his constituents, there's no evidence that he was really interested in the topic, but to appease his constituents, he wrote a letter on March 28th to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. So you can actually see how fast things are moving here. So March 21st was Hillsdale. March 25th was Hynek's press conference. March 28th is Gerald Ford writing this letter just a week after Hillsdale. This is how hot things were back then with the subject. And he writes, in the firm belief that the American public deserves a better explanation than that thus far given by the Air Force, I strongly recommend that there be a committee investigation of the UFO phenomena. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment of the subject. Great letter, and it worked. On April 5th, there was an open congressional hearing on UFOs. Hynek was called to testify, and Hynek's quite embarrassed at this point because now this is 66, and he's been with Project Blue Book since 52. Actually, he was doing investigations with the Air Force even before Blue Book started. So he's been in this game a long time. And at this point, he's seen so much stuff, he knows that there's something going on. He knows that these are credible witnesses. He knows that what people are saying aren't just misidentified planes or whatnot, or swamp gas. But he's now in cartoons all over the place, all these jokes about him saying, he's, Dr. Swamp Gas and stuff like that. So to help himself, trying to get out from under this rock he's now found himself, in this open congressional hearing, he says, if people don't like what the Air Force has to say about the subject, maybe there should be an independent group that looks into this, a civilian group. And the Air Force responded, that's a great idea. In fact, we'll put that together for you. Like, if anybody can see the issue with that. So the Air Force reached out to Edward Condon, the head of the University of Colorado, and Condon, no surprise, military ties, government ties, and he's seen here smirking over a paperweight of allegedly UFO reports. Condon and his small committee, they audit Project Blue Book, they do their own quote-unquote investigations. They come out with a study called The Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects. This report is published in a book that is actually still available for sale. And in this book, you know what they say? They say, well, we don't think there's anything to it. Surprise. And so the Air Force says, well, if this independent civilian group says there's nothing to it, and we've been trying to tell you there's nothing to it, we're just gonna close down now. And so after 17 years, Project Blue Book closes down. And out of those over 12,000 cases that they investigated, 701 they still put as unidentified. That's actually a lot for the mission that they were trying to do, which was seemingly try to dissuade people from thinking anything was going on. So one of the big reasons that they said that they were not going to continue investigating UFOs was because they said there was no threat to national security. That was their big thing. They said, we're the military, and if there's no threat to national security, what are we doing? And so they closed down. And so Michigan is not only the Great Lakes state, keep in mind we are also the swamp gas state. And moving ahead now. Fort Smith Air Force Base, 1975. Keep in mind why the military said they were getting out of the UFO game. No threat to national security. Well, had they been around a few years later, when a UFO came down over a base here in Michigan, that has nuclear bombers at it, maybe they would have seen there is some reason to think that it has to do with national security. So Wurtsmith Air Force Base housed nuclear bombers. It was eventually decommissioned in 1993, became a private airport at that point. But up until that time, yes, nuclear bombers. And on the night of October 30th, 1975, a giant white glowing disc descended over the base, particularly over the weapons storage area. Now, the people that were guarding the weapons storage area, obviously freaking out. There's no protocol of what to do when a flying saucer lands over the base. They called to the air traffic tower and they say, do you see this? And they're like, yes, of course we see it. We've got it on radar and everything. It's there, it's hovering over the base, we don't know what to do. Maybe we should scramble a fighter jet. Well, at that moment, there just happened to actually be a plane coming in for a landing at the base. And it was not a fancy jet fighter, it was a KC-135 Stratotanker. Pretty much just a big, sort of lumbering, in comparison to a jet fighter anyway, refueling plane. And they said to the plane coming in, hey, do you see that object over the weapons storage area? And they're like, oh yeah, we see this big white light. We're like, can you just kind of fly towards it, see what it does? And orders being orders, they moved towards the brightly lit object and it shot up and then it flew directly south. And the plane was ordered to follow it. Pursuit is maybe an exaggerated term based upon how much quickly the white light could fly. So the plane is following it until it lost it on the lights in the crux of the thumb. Then the plane was ordered to come back, turns around, heading back to the base, when the object suddenly flew up next to it, paced it for several moments, and then shot up directly into space. Okay, national security. So what's scarier than a UFO coming down over base with nuclear weapons? How about 4 bases over the course of roughly 2 weeks? Now, Loring Air Force Base on October 27th, just a few days before, reported the same thing. A white glowing object descended over the base. And then it was Wurtsmith's turn on October 30th. And then out west, the tour continued with Malmstrom and Minot Air Force bases. And this wasn't even Malmstrom and Minot's first UFO incursion at their bases. But 4 bases over the course of roughly 2 weeks, all with nuclear weapons, all reporting essentially the same thing coming down over the base. Interesting coincidence. Don't know what to make of it. I don't even know if this is all the bases. These are just the ones that I found out about. Okay, now moving over to the west side of the state and their sighting, which was March 8th, 1994. And there were over 300 witnesses that night of March 8th. Now, these sightings were actually all over the state, to tell you the truth. But most of the attention was here on the west side. And I am developing a presentation specifically just on this event that is going to cover some of the state stuff around the state too. It was a very crazy night. But here, over 60 people in the Holland area called 911 about the UFOs they were seeing. And people were seeing all sorts of things. People were seeing the glowing discs in various colors, much like they were seeing in 66 in southeast Michigan. People were seeing big silver discs with lights around them. People were seeing triangles. One gentleman saw a massive rectangle, he said, that was about 1 mile wide. So people were seeing all sorts of stuff. And again, 911 was receiving several calls. The same number when you call if there's an intruder in your home or a medical emergency. People were calling them about the lights they saw in the sky. And this is just a quick exchange here from the 911 transcripts that kind of amused me. So 911 answers the phone, 911, and the caller says, "You guys busy?" Can you imagine calling 911 saying, "Are you guys busy?" And so And 911 says, a little bit, you know. And the caller says, all right, this call really isn't about it's really not an emergency. We're just calling about the UFO in the sky. And 911's like, like, oh my gosh, it's another one. And so the caller says, they're out there, they ain't airplanes. And the story focused greatly on a family of four. The father isn't in this picture, but the mother and the two children are. This made it to the front page of the Detroit News Free Press. The Graves family, the phenomena that happened that day needed sort of a spokesperson. They needed to put a spotlight on somebody, and the Graves family certainly got the biggest spotlight. And their report, they live across from a farm that is no longer there, but they said they called 911 at about 9:30 p.m. and said there's this giant silver disc hovering over the farm across the street. And so the police were hearing calls from people that said, I saw these lights and then they flew off. But here's a caller that says, there's this disc and it's still there. So the police dispatched Officer Jeff Veldhouse to investigate. Now, these sort of sketches that you see here were done by the family, the mother, the father, the two children, all pretty much the same thing that they drew essentially with the lights. And this is a sketch from Officer Jeff Veldhouse. So here's the Graves family, here's the farm across the street, and as Officer Veldhouse shows up, there are now two objects. And he's looking at them in his binoculars, and then one of them starts to slowly drift away. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna follow that one, because it looks like it's headed towards the airport. So, the local, smaller airport, not a big airport. And so he gets in his car and he's slowly following it. And apparently, as he was driving away, and as he got far away enough, the single object that was still there over the farmhouse then split into five identical objects in the sky. And so Veldhouse is driving towards the airport, and the police are like, oh my gosh, what do we do? We have an officer that spotted one, now he's following it. I don't know, maybe it was caught on radar. So they called the airport in Grand Rapids, now known as Gerald Ford Airport, not at the time, but they were unable to get a hold of anybody, and so they just switched right away to an airport in Muskegon, which they knew had a radar, and they had the National Weather Service stationed there. And so they got a radar operator on the phone, Jack Bashong. I was actually with Jack the past couple days, and his story is really riveting. And so he's watching on his weather radar 3 thumbnail-sized objects. And that's very large for the type of radar that he has. And his radar also is not built to detect aircraft. It's built to detect weather patterns. So he says whenever anything appears on his radar, it's either very large or very reflective or both, and he's seeing these very big objects. And so the police were like, oh my gosh, we got it on radar too. And Veldhouse, the officer that was at the Graves house, at that moment says the object he's pursuing disappeared. The Graves family said the 5 objects now across the street over the farm, they also disappeared, just vanished. But from Bashong's perspective, he sees that the objects suddenly flew west over Lake Michigan, and because he has the benefit of seeing that they went from point A to point B in roughly a second, he said, he goes, you do the math, they were flying at 72,000 miles an hour. Which is crazy, right? And so he becomes somebody that drew a lot of attention as well. Right after this night, Mufon was all over this case to investigate it. I had just joined a few months earlier. I was not a field investigator yet, and I was a younger guy with no money, and I couldn't make it out to the other side of the state anyway. But I was like, oh my gosh, is it always gonna be like this? And not so much. But So the Center for UFO Studies, again, J. Allen Hynek's group, had a representative in Kalamazoo, Dr. Michael Swords, who was an instructor at Western Michigan. He goes out to the Muskegon Airport to investigate Bashang, to interview Bashang, and ask Bashang if they have the radar data. He says that they don't. They typically don't save radar data, at least at that time. Like, weather's typically not that interesting, so they don't have a way to just record what storms are out over Lake Michigan or anything like that. So Swords says, well, how about this? Can you draw what you saw? So Bashang says, yeah, sure, I can do that. So between Swords and Bashang, they did a series of sketches, and I put red dots over where Jack had black dots just to give a better visibility of it. But he says, over the course of the night, sometimes he saw 3, sometimes he saw 4 objects. Sometimes he would see this little scatter pattern here means that there were multiple objects that were smaller than the big ones. But then, they shot out over Lake Michigan, and he said they stopped at a point over Lake Michigan, which was the only spot on the entire lake that wasn't frozen over. It was water. The objects decided, now at this point he's seen dozens of them. He said they stopped exactly where there was water. Now you look at this map and you say, well, what about Chicago? Where are their sightings? There aren't any from Illinois, Indiana. The only people even associated with Chicago were 2 pilots flying over Lake Michigan who reported this. But, and there was even this weird video that came out somewhat recently where somebody said, well, maybe people were seeing like a Bulls basketball game, like maybe they were all happy and they shot off fireworks after the game, and that's what people were seeing. So that was an interesting explanation. Anyway, back to it, was that this is pretty weird, and there's no other way to say it. And Bashang said, just to up the ante, that the radar that they had at the time was one of those big sort of sweep radars, and that every time the radar would sweep over this mass of objects over the lake, some of the lights would move to stay in the line of the light, meaning of the radar ping, meaning that they were saying to Bashang, yes, we know that you've got us on radar. Just to show you, we're going to stay in your radar path. So Jack very obviously got the chills about that. If you are interested in the March 1994 event, I don't know, did anybody see the Unsolved Mysteries about this? Okay, very few of you. If you have Netflix, if you are interested in more about this, in the 3rd season of Unsolved Mysteries, it's called Something in the Sky. There is an episode about this, features Bashang, features Holly Graves, features Officer Jeff Feldhaus, and I'm in it for a minute. But the episode is a great overview of what happened that night. I highly recommend it. Okay, now on to a case that I personally investigated. Anybody here familiar with Linden? So there was a gentleman that called me and left a very basic message. It said, call me. Oftentimes, when I get a voicemail message about somebody who's seen something, it goes some version of something like this. I was with my sister, I picked her up, we went to the convenience store, and then she said she saw this blue light, and I couldn't see it at first. Then I saw it, then I thought it looked red instead of blue, but we agreed I saw it. Then we went across the street, stopped the car, got up to look at it, then it went behind the trees, and we tried to follow it and couldn't find it anymore. And it's sort of a long, paced, rambling, basic thing. But when you get a call like this, and the person's voice is shaking, call me. Like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be interesting. So this was June 6, 2021. And so I called the guy back, and he was driving down Linden Road at about 3:30 in the morning. Said it's very dark on the road. When he sees, and he's used to driving down the road at night, sees off to the left, up ahead of him, this very bright light. And it's very strange because there's no explanation, he said, why there would be any sort of bright light there. And as he drives up to it, he slows just a little bit and sees something very strange. He says he sees a silver monolith standing in the field with these white glowing orbs sort of moving and undulating all around the monolith. So he's like, nope, and he keeps driving. And as he drives just a little bit, this orange teardrop shaped light shifts out onto the road, and almost like saying, don't come back, you just keep going. So he does, he keeps going. And the next day, he decides to drive by again. When he does, this is the actual witness here. When he does, there's this big 30-foot patch of dead grass. And we came out, me and two other investigators, and we brought our little baggies and all this stuff to do soil sample retrieval, which we did. We got stuff within the circle, we got stuff outside the circle for the control. We sent it to a lab, and our lab at the time was in Missouri, and they came back saying this appears to be a standard chemical dump. They could identify all the chemicals that were dumped there, and they said it's nothing is strange or weird about it, except the unfortunate part that somebody decided to dump a bunch of stuff out in the woods where they shouldn't have. So, the witness is credible. The dead spot of grass was there, and how to reconcile the two. The only thing that I could come up with was somehow the phenomena was attracted to this chemical dump. But it was very strange. I was there. It was kind of creepy being on the spot. And yeah, we did our due diligence, got out there right away, did tests on it, and yep, just a chemical dump. So the reports keep coming. Again, we get about 200 every year. We're updating our database again this year. That number may even spike higher. And the thing about the phenomena is it happens, first of all year. We get about 1 to 2 sightings a week, every week. There isn't a big time of year where we see more sightings. Sometimes we might get 3 or 4 the week of the 4th of July. But apart from that, it's consistent that way. It's also consistent that wherever there's more people see things. And so every time you ask our software, hey, show me where the last 100 sightings were, you're always going to get a population map. And so it's consistent that way as well. And you could go to any other local, state, or province and do the same thing and see essentially the same thing. So it's not just somebody out in the middle of nowhere on some sort of substance, seeing things on Halloween night or whatever. It's persistent, it's consistent, and we do our best to look into it and share what we find with people who will listen. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Thank you for your patience with the technical issues. If you are interested in investigating UFOs yourself, if you go to mufon.com, you can find out how to do that. Or if you have something you want to report to MUFON, go ahead and report it to MUFON, and an investigator will get in touch with you. We have about a half dozen investigators active in the state at the moment. If you are interested in local meetings, if you want to hear more about the UFO phenomena, you could go to mimufon.org, which is our state chapter, and find out about how we get together locally on a regular basis as well. Again, thanks so much. If anybody has any either questions or comments or has something that they've seen that they'd like to share, like to open the floor? Yes.
Okay, last summer, there was a lot of stuff. People were seeing things all over the United States. Remember that? Stuff in the sky, they didn't know what it was.
Okay, so
After the balloons went over.
yeah, first there were the balloons,
Yeah.
and then that story went away, and then the drones,
Right.
which is what I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and everyone talks about the New Jersey drones, even though that they were seen all over the place, but mostly on the eastern seaboard. And yeah, it's a very strange thing because, first of all, people started reporting what they assumed to be drones in the sky, and then more of these stories started coming, and local politicians at the state level often were saying, hey, U.S. government, our people are seeing these weird things, what the heck are they? They were flying over military bases, then the press got on the federal level of folks that are supposed to be responsible for discussing this, and they said that they were investigating it, that they didn't know what it was, but they weren't willing to fund any sort of extra surveillance or defense. And so yeah, the story kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden, just went away. Just completely disappeared overnight, much like the balloons did a couple of years before. The story kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it disappeared. Now, my conspiracy theory, and I'll say it every time I wade into these waters of conspiracy, as if this isn't weird enough, that I think that that the government didn't create these scenarios necessarily, but it wanted to see how the public responded to them. And so it let the story grow to a certain point where they got a feeling of like, okay, people are not happy, but they're not running out in the street, blowing up cars, panic level. This is good to know. Okay, so maybe we'll test the water again in a little bit, much like when those UFO videos were released recently. People, I think they were doing that. Let's see how the people react. Let's see how everyone reacts to this. And I think that they're using that for this reason. Now, the thing too about the drones in New Jersey and thereabouts was that we see this a lot in the phenomena, where if somebody calls a UFO a specific name, other people will just glom on and start calling it the same thing. People who were first of all, people who were seeing drones were saying they saw drones. Then people who misidentified aircraft said they were seeing drones. People who were seeing anything in the sky they couldn't identify, they were calling it drones. So it built upon itself for that reason alone, is that there was a lot of people saying, I want to be part of this too. I saw something too. It was red and it looked like a giant bird. I'll call it a drone. I saw a drone too, just to be part of the conversation. So I think that helped fuel the fire, and everyone started using the word drones. Now, what didn't make it into the news very much, but in March, there was a military base down in Louisiana that also got hectored by drones. And they had the technology to sort of shut down the frequency that it was supposedly receiving from wherever it was receiving it. So to sort of bring the drones down, but the drones weren't responding to that. And there was a very good reason that some drones won't respond when you try to break their radio connection to the person that's driving them, is that they're being run by AI. Okay, so this is kind of scary, but it's true. If you look this up, Ukraine is sending drones at the Russians that Russians used to just bring down. They would break the connection and then they would drop. But when they figured out, the Ukrainians well, if we put AI in it, we don't need a controller. The drone runs itself. The drone will independently go and kill Russians. So yes, the Ukrainians are currently sending robots into the sky, independently thinking to kill others. So I'm not waxing one way or the other politically on either side of that war, but I mean, how Terminator can you get by sending independently thinking robots in the sky that can't be brought down by people to use their best judgment of how to go after people. So the thought might have been that it was a foreign actor like China or somebody like that messing with us. Maybe. Yeah, that's what I got to say about it. And yeah, the story disappeared and it's all still a mystery. All right. Sir, with the hat? Yes, you. Yep, yep.
If the UFOs are real and have been here, where do you think they're coming from? Because that 72,000 miles an hour is not nearly fast enough to get there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be that could be how fast they go in idle. So there is a very complex theory that some of the cutting edge people who think about this sort of thing say can account for interstellar travel. And the theory, and I'm not gonna go too much into weeds on this, but the theory is, it starts off with the fact that gravity is weird. A lot of different things that we know in the universe, the forces, can be detected either as a wave or a particle, saying that most of the phenomena are basically forms of light, but they only know gravity is a wave and not a particle. So they said, well, maybe the particle is in the fifth dimension, we're just seeing the residue from it. So essentially that they're saying that if these objects can access the fifth dimension, then they can absolutely do shortcuts because of the way that if you say that gravity exists in the fifth dimension as a particle, then it moves at incredible speeds. It can go very far in a very fast way, and that they're saying that basically these objects flutter in and out of the fifth dimension to be able to shoot all over the place. That's one theory. But yeah, I know, so it's a lot.
Yeah.
But
What if some of these things are like satellites? Because I notice in the sky you can look up and see satellites going in. And I even recorded one of the SpaceX satellite launches, or you can see them all in a row.
oh yeah.
And I have that on my channel.
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't mention that in terms of misidentified phenomena. If you've ever seen a SpaceX launch, say, yeah, it certainly looks like a fleet of flying saucers. Yes, people absolutely 100% do report satellites as flying saucers.
Because I see it almost all the time. If you look real close, you can see them moving.
Mm-hmm. So there are groups that do sky watches, and they get together. Maybe you've heard of this. Maybe you've heard of the gentleman by the name of Stephen Greer. He calls it CE5, which don't get me started on his misuse of the term CE5. But groups of people will go out into dark fields at night and do sky watches. And I've been part of a number of these, and they're always done right when the sun goes down till like maybe an hour or two until after the sun has completely disappeared and the sky is fairly dark. Well, the thing is that satellites are far enough out that the sun is still hitting them. Even though we can't see the sun anymore, the satellites are still in the line of the sun. And so sometimes you can really see satellites very well. And sometimes you can see the iridium flare of them spinning and it looks like they're strobing. So people that do these sky watches will go out and either be satisfied by seeing some satellites, or they'll think, well, that one can't be a satellite, but it is a satellite. So.
Yeah, I see them all the time. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you had your hand up for a bit?
Does what happened in Area 51 back years and years ago, does that provide any information for what's going on now?
Well, it is absolutely 100% official that that was a place, and the areas around there. There's a smattering of bases that it is known and is admitted that stealth aircraft were tested there and other exotic aircraft. So yes, that's not just a conspiracy theory. All sorts of aircraft were tested there before they became publicly known. Now, the idea was that in one of those bases, including Area 51, that possibly flying saucer wreckage was brought there, and that there was maybe some reverse engineering going on, and that They were trying to figure out how UFOs work. There are some whistleblowers out there that claim that. Bob Lazar is a big one. There was a documentary about him a couple of years ago, and there's another one coming out this year, maybe even two, I think. But there are people that say that. I'm more of a grassroots type of person, focused on what is seen here locally in the state. But yeah, I find that some of the stuff is compelling, and then there's a large group of people around that will just make stuff up and think that it's as good as the stuff that's actually. I'm going to take one from this side.
South Linden Road was just,
So this was 5 years ago, so I have to look at it again. I know that it's north of here. Well, I guess it has to be north of here, right? I'm not from the immediate area, but if I drove up the road, I would eventually get to a point where I would say, yeah, this is it. Not too far, probably about 5 minutes.
from here.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Nice.
Could you touch briefly upon these phenomena that may come and go out of water, or lakes,
Okay.
oceans?
Yeah, so USOs are what they're commonly referred to. And the thing about how these unknown craft travel is that they can seemingly travel, they call transmedium, they can seemingly travel as fast through space as it can through the atmosphere, as it can through water. And people have wondered, for example, with the stuff seen around Lake Michigan, is it possible that there's something like a base under Lake Michigan? I don't think that's the case. There is such a small percentage of sightings we normally get around Lake Michigan that it would seem like that there's not a big correlation. And if one wanted to make a correlation between a body of water and the number of UFO sightings, we would be looking under the Detroit River for a UFO base, just based upon numbers. But yeah, a lot of objects. Richard Dolan, I think, put out a book. He's a famous researcher, and he's putting out a second book on it. So one of the big UFO videos that was released by the government recently, the three big ones you see all the time on the news, the grainy black and white ones, shows an object just flying, going through the water, coming out at the same speed it was flying through the water. So yeah, they seem to be able to just go through anything. I don't know if they could go through Earth that fast. Maybe they could tunnel that quick too. No idea, but people do see them. And I mean, if you had to think theoretically, if there was some civilization that came here from somewhere else and they wanted to hide from us, you could hide on the other side of the moon very easily, or you could hide very deep in the water very easily. So that's an open question that keeps sticking around. Okay, can I take one from this side too, if there was one? Did you get Brett?
Do you believe in aliens? Like, has anyone ever seen them? I mean, it's spaceships, but it's Earth. What's inside?
Yeah, as the late Bud Hopkins always used to say, he was a big UFO, particularly contact investigator. He would always say, people are so fixated on the car's driver's license plate that they forget to take a look at the driver. So, yeah, the contact phenomena is a very big thing. There are many witnesses, many credible witnesses, many witnesses sharing stories about their contact that don't know each other, couldn't know each other, couldn't know each other's details. And MUFON does look into these. There's a group called the Experiencer Resource Team that takes the stories of people who have contact. And they're slightly different than UFO reports and investigation, because in a UFO report, you have this sort of checkbox. It was this fast, it was this color, I saw it at this time, it was at this level in the sky, you know, blah, blah, blah. But with regards to the contact cases, they're always long, drawn-out narratives, so they're a bit tougher to investigate, and there's almost never physical evidence. Sometimes there is, but yeah, I absolutely don't dismiss the fact that somebody's got to be driving these things, and sometimes they get a little bit closer. Can take one for the century.
In the mid-1960s, I was on a motorcycle with a friend of mine. We were headed south, and we saw this light, and typical, like circular with lights all the way around it, or flash different colors. And we stopped. We were on motorcycles. We stopped and we were just looking at this thing. And there was no sound. We couldn't hear anything. We couldn't smell anything. And we were just looking at it, and all of a sudden we got scared. And we just left. And we knew damn well that we should have reported that. But we were way beyond the mileage limit of the pass that we had from our army base. So we never reported it to anybody. Because if we had, it'd probably put us in the stockade.
Wow, yeah, thanks for sharing. I could tell that when I was talking about the silver disc with the lights, you're like, so, that's your reaction to that. Thank you for sharing. Right.
There's a big scuttlebutt out that they're looking at us to see how good we are. There is another feeling that the government knows more than what we are talking about. You brought to the surface a lot of existence of reality, and that's the one that I cite is the shutting down of the nuclear missiles, and the evidence there that it was not our doing. Have you any comments on that have come from the government that they have leaked out?
Well, I guess the closest to that is like you have somebody like Robert Salas or Dean, folks that were in the military that actually were around when things like this happened firsthand. But I haven't seen anything approaching an official disclosure from the government. Like, yes, we admit that this happened, and we don't know how it could have happened if it wasn't for some unknown force or something like that. That's just inviting trouble, I think, for a government to say really strange things are happening. We have no control over them. We have no idea why it's happening, and so it's easier, it's better to cover it up. And people say, like, oh, the government is covering up UFOs and the government's covering up Of course they are, because they cover up stuff about everything. And this isn't like a harsh criticism, like, gosh darn that government, but it's true. I mean, they very carefully curate what's taught, and this has been the case forever. I'm not talking about this administration or the last administration, whatever, but if they told us everything they know about UFOs, it would be an exception. It would be the one exception where they didn't hide something. So, of course, they're gonna hide stuff.
What about the latest flight that they did some U-turns, or not U-turns, square turns flying, changing direction? That said that we can't do that. We
Right.
don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Not only do we not know how to do that, it would squish the people inside to move at that speed and take those type of turns. So yeah, it sort of goes back to that exotic technology about, like I said, flittering in, out, creating a bubble around the ship that's actually in another dimension, and all sorts of crazy physics stuff. I was an English major, so some of the stuff I do my best to pass along, but yeah, sir. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
January of 2023 is about the time with all the drones out east, and then China with the shoot the balloon over. But they scattered or sent a jet fighter after some unidentified object, and it apparently went in Lake Huron.
Oh, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. So, okay, so this was I would say, the tail end of the balloon phenomenon, where there was the balloon that was seen over Alaska, and then over on the West Coast, and then parts of Canada, and suddenly balloon sightings were popping up everywhere. It was like the precursor to the drone thing that recently happened. Now, the balloon that went down was a balloon, and I think it was a balloon over Lake Huron, They first saw it in Montana, and then it flew over Minnesota, flew over, I think it was Wisconsin, and then over Lake Michigan, over Michigan, and it took 2 or 3 days, something like that. And then when it was over Lake Huron, that's when they decided to shoot it down. So we'll just say on the optimistic side for the speed of this thing that it took 2 days to travel that far. Now, if an alien species takes 2 days to get from Montana to Michigan, there's no way that they would get here from another planet. They would have had to have left millions of years ago. So for that particular reason, it was steady in the sky the whole time before they took it down. It did have some weird shape and things dangling from it, but really I think it was a balloon.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to share a story with you.
Oh, thank you.
In 1973, a lot of people rebuked this. That came from me. The story starts out with my friend says, you know, on Denton Road, is in Michigan, Denton Road by Cherry Hill Road. He reported a strange object coming out of the woods, like a fireball. I said, his name's Ray. I said, Ray, you're nuts. He said, no, let's go over, we'll find out what it is. You go down Denton Road, and you go across the bridge, and down is an intersection. There's a gravel road. We turn around, we come up by the post. There's a post that is marked, and it's marked Millmaster. He said that a long time ago, this object came and burnt someone to a crisp at this point, and they marked it as Millmaster Post. I said, Ray, you're nuts. We went down there, went by the post, you know, you have to go over the bridge and come back and stay by the post. I get out of the car, he's in my car. I go up by the bridge, and it's not at night, I'm looking down the river. I see this little white light. It's getting bigger, it's like getting bigger and bigger. I'm like, okay, time for me to get out of here. I'm hustling, and he looks in the rearview mirror and says, that can't be him, you don't run that fast. So I said, wait, hit it. We went down Cherry Hill, Denton Road to Cherry Hill. And as we hit the Cherry Hill intersection, this light come up from underneath the bridge, followed us to this intersection, but we had hightailed it down Cherry Hill Road, and you can catch it. And he slowly went back. Now, the thing is, I said, wait, we gotta get this on tape. I come back the next day with another friend in photography. We set up the camera and everything in the back seat, ready to film everything. Nothing happening yet. The police come by. Boys, what are you doing here? Oh, we're filming this fireball that comes out. Oh, you mean the Denton Road fireball? Yeah. Okay, yeah, ain't got coverages? No. Okay. So then he goes down by the road, puts on his flashers, and takes off, and shuts the flashers off. We think he wants us to take a picture of that. So it's the Denton Road fireball, right? It doesn't end there. I go back to work, I talk to people there. My boss lives on Denton Road. Oh yeah, we see it all the time. Okay, what's up with that? And I saw this thing. And nobody can tell me anything. I was on drugs, I didn't drink. I wanted it on film. Never happened. There's a cover up in that logo. Now you go back there, all you see is suburbs, houses, it's all built up, it's gone.
So I had several friends that lived in that area, and so I'm familiar with the area, and I was saying something was under that bridge. There's not that much space under there. So that must have been
I
pretty
couldn't
tight.
tell you what it was, it was a light. Came out like a basketball. Size of a basketball. Came out, followed us down to the road, went back under the bridge and down the stream. And the people around you don't care, because It doesn't bother me.
I've never actually heard that before, and like that. And now I know other friends who live in that immediate area. I have to ask them if they've never heard of it.
I had heard of that.
Yeah, the den.
As teenagers, we were
Huh.
afraid to go out the road to see the light, or, you know, to be kind of like anxious to see if it was real or not, so I'm amazed that somebody else is talking now.
Wow, I'm amazed I've never heard of it. Not only because of this is my thing, but because I knew people that live there, and they would have surely brought it up to me. Okay. So thanks so much, everybody, for coming out. If you have any other, you have one last thing you want to say or ask?
An observation.
Okay.
We had a recent road trip. Okay. Came back to Earth, Point Linden. Traveling around 24,000 miles an hour when it came into the atmosphere. It was on fire. You said you had something traveling 72,000 miles an hour. It was burned up in our atmosphere.
Oh, you're saying that you think that that would be
You're
the
saying that heat would stop everything from going that fast.
right? So.
A plane called Blackbird, it was called Blackbird because they was too many planes on it. Turned black. That was it. Lower, 26, 27,000 miles an hour.
Sure. Yeah, and it goes back to the exotic technology, and it you know just begs the question. I mean, just or the observation. We'll say.
Technology, talking about technology cannot overcome physics.
Well.
Not going to find outer space. When it comes in, we've got a bigger plane down in Arizona.
Sure. Until we learn new physics.
Obviously, I'm a big unbeliever.
So it's just a matter of, you know, if we compare the science of today to the science of 100 years ago, then 200 years ago, the things that we're doing now are miraculous compared to a previous time. And I think if you have a civilization that's hundreds of years in advance of ours, even thousands of years, think of what we're going to be able to do in 1,000 years. I would think, give us 1,000 years and we'll solve that problem ourselves.
We'll see you then.
Hey, thanks so much again, everybody.
We may not be here.
My final question is, what would they do? Like, what if some of these UFOs are like drones and don't have any actual organic,
Oh, yeah, and that's you know, that's
like our actual drones from another, you know what I mean?
right. That's a great question and a great point as well. And I'm trying to remember if it was Seth Shostak or Michael Shermer, and I think it was Shostak. He had a book, it was called Confessions of an Alien Hunter. And in it he says, he speculates what he thinks would happen if a civilization is around long enough. And yeah, it's what we're facing right now, the question of would AI simply take over and be the dominant intelligence of that species, or even take over. And he said that, he goes, if there are civilizations out there that are thousands of years old, they probably have gone that route and become AI. And that what we're seeing in our atmosphere, or even on the ground, is cybernetic, is robotic, is something
Somebody
that's
else's
technological.
probes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I mean. Somebody else's drones from, you know, another place.
And he says that he believes that's a natural course of evolution for any species, and that so then when the species that's been around the longest probably has the best technology, and then when they reach another civilization, they are probably technology as well, and they probably just merge and can merge easily because they're technologically based rather than biologically based. And that he says the top tier, if there is any sort of governmental structure, any sort of civilization structure to the universe, or any given galaxy anywhere, that it's probably run by computers.
Thank you for the presentation. This is really interesting.
The only episode I saw of it, the only paranormal stuff I watch on television, I have like the old In Search of
Okay.
on DVD, and I
Yeah,
watch those
yeah.
because I think those are actually excellent. But apart from that, I try to stay away because I get frustrated so many times. I'm like, oh, you guys overstepped there. Oh, so,
They're
but-
trying to dramatize it,
Yeah.
and like you're saying, what were you saying, that's a dare?
Yeah, the truth is stranger than fiction. They take it as a dare.
You gotta push entertainment value if it's gonna be entertainment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.